Okay, well, we're having about 50 people joining the line and getting in the room. We will start right on time. So greeting from Beijing, everyone. A warm welcome to you all joining today's webinar titled Road to COP30, China's Role in Global Climate Investment from All Around the World. As we look ahead to COP30 in Brazil in this November, the urgency of advancing ambitious climate action has never been greater. As you all know, that China is now the world's largest investor in renewable energy, contributing more than any other countries to solar, wind, and hydro projects. Its capital flows, financing models, and technology exports are transforming the landscape of global climate investment. So today's discussion will critically examine China's evolving role in global climate investment and its potential to reshape the financial architecture that underpins the global climate efforts. So now I will have the privilege of introducing you our distinguished opening remarks speaker, Dr. Wafaa El-Sadr. Please allow me to introduce her a little bit. Professor El-Sadr is a world well-known scholar in global health and infectious diseases, whose groundbreaking work has shaped responses to some of the most pressing health challenges of our time. She is now leading Columbia Global as our executive vice president. She also holds the Dr. Mahelda Crane Armfa Chair of Global Health at Columbia University. She's also the founder and current director of Global Health Center at ICAP. And also she is a university professor in epidemiology and medicine. Her vision for Columbia Global is to establish a strategic platform to promote and facilitate engagement of the university's faculty, researcher, students, and alumni with the world to enhancing understanding, contributing to addressing global challenges, and advance knowledge and its exchange. Under her leadership, Columbia Global aligns the university's K Global initiatives, including Columbia Global Centers, Columbia World Projects, the Committee on Global Thought, and the Institute for Ideas and Imagination. Beyond her scholarship, she is also widely recognized for her broader contribution to society. She was a recipient of the prestigious MacArthur Fellowship. She's also a member of National Academy of Medicine, the Council for Foreign Relations, the Africa Academy of Sciences, and the Advisory Committee to the Director of National Institutes of Health. So we're deeply honored to have her tonight with us. Well, today, depends on where you are. And I now warmly welcome Dr. Wafaa El-Sadr to deliver the opening remarks for today's program, also kick off the whole sessions to celebrate and contribute to COP30. Wafaa, please, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Helena. I'm greatly honored to be here with you today. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. And thank you all for joining us. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural event in our series, The Road to COP30, Local Voices and Global Pathways. As you well know, the world is facing increasingly difficult climate-related crises that demand global collaboration. And here at Columbia, and certainly at Columbia Global, as Helena mentioned, what we aim to do is to pull together and harness the vast expertise of the faculty at the university across the 17 schools at Columbia to be able to help and in resolving some of the pressing issues and try to contribute to some of the solutions that we are all seeking in addressing climate change. And through the Columbia Global Centers, which Columbia has now currently in 11 locations around the world, including this one at Beijing, these centers really serve as vital hubs for partnerships and collaborations and help to drive these solutions that the world urgently needs. Now, as you know, addressing climate change is one of our key priorities here, which is why I'm excited to be here with you for this first of a 9-part series across all of our global centers. So please let your colleagues and friends know about this series, and please join us. Hopefully, if not today, then let them know to join us for the rest of the series. And this series is designed to spotlight the perspectives of communities and experts from around the world in the lead up to COP30, the UN climate conference that's taking place in Belém in Brazil this November. So our goal through this webinar series is to connect the local insights, the breadth of local insights regarding climate and to the climate negotiations, and recognize probably the most durable solutions are those that will bridge the local realities with international action. Now, each of the global centers from Beijing to Rio is hosting a dialogue similar to this one and reflecting the most important expectations, priorities for COP30, and from the perspective of the country and from the region where they are situated. We hope that these discussions will explore the urgent questions that you all have in mind, and also the questions that are really shaping the local conversations and how they connect to the global discourse on climate and climate change. You'll hear from Columbia faculty, you'll hear from local country experts, as well as activists and others, and voices that together hopefully will capture the diversity of climate leadership. And I think importantly, we really want to highlight in each of these events the value of youth, because we need to keep in mind that any durable climate action must be co-created with the next generation. So I'm very happy that today's conversation, we're starting out with a conversation that's led by the Global Center in Beijing, and that brings together academics and local experts to discuss China's important role in global climate investment and its path towards COP30. I want to thank our colleagues at the center, Helena, and your many colleagues who made this happen, as well as all of our panelists today for sharing their expertise and time with us. And I encourage you again to engage with the sessions to come. We're going to be moving from Asia to the Middle East, to Africa, Europe, and Latin America, and trying to bring some insights and shed light on the momentum that's building towards COP30. And with that, I'll hand it back to Helena to introduce our moderator and begin the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Wafaa. And we are at the Beijing are especially excited to be the first one in the show. And one of the highlights for the pioneer role is we have a distinguished, exceptional moderator actually for today's session. Please allow me to introduce her to you, Professor Lisa Sachs. She is the director of Columbia Center on Sustainable Investment, associate professor of professional practice at Columbia Climate School. And she's also leading Columbia's MS degree program in climate finance. Lisa is a globally recognized expert in the ways that law, policies, and business practices shape global investment flow and affect sustainable development. She works with governments around the world, regional and international development organizations, financial institutions, companies, civil society organizations, and academic center to understand interrelations of investment flows and sustainable development. So that to influence investment policies and practices to promote SDGs and the Paris Agreement, and even beyond that. So now, with all the excitement, I will hand it over to Lisa, please.
Thank you so much for a far too generous introduction. I'm incredibly privileged to moderate this discussion because I want to learn from our incredibly distinguished panelists. First, let me also just thank the Columbia Global Center in Beijing for hosting this incredibly timely discussion. It's timely not only because of the road to COP, but it's timely because of all of the extraordinary developments happening in China, in the region that I'm eager to learn about, and at this pivotal moment for energy investment and for scaling finance, which is, of course, absolutely a global priority. I think the series of events that Columbia Global Centers has facilitated is wonderful because it really shows the different discussions that are happening in different parts of the world, which I feel privileged also to get to see. And we should learn from really what are the both regional experiences, the regional challenges, and what this implies for global frameworks to achieve cooperation. So it's a wonderful series. Couldn't be a better global center to kick this off, and I feel extraordinarily privileged to be able to moderate the panel. I think everyone joining us knows how remarkable China's story has been, which I have been trying to really rigorously understand. In just over a decade, China has become a global leader in both the innovation and the deployment of clean energy. And there's a lot for us to learn from that about leadership, policy, what works, industrial policy, finance, the technology, roadmaps, and so on. By the way, if you want to see this graphically, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, just a few days ago put out a graph on energy investment across regions. And China is leagues ahead of any other region, but also remarkable, by the way, is the growth from 10 years ago. It's a chart showing the investment in 2015 and the investment in 2025. The investment in 2025 in China is off the charts. The chart scale has to be larger because of China's investment, but also the growth. That said, there are, of course, continued challenges, as one would expect with any unprecedented transition in China. There is the continued construction of coal plants in some regions, which it seems inconsistent with China's overall direction. There are new questions about how to manage the industrial overcapacity, for instance, in solar panels. And then that's all domestic. But then perhaps one of the biggest challenges, but also opportunities, is thinking about China's now role in international leadership, which is also an extraordinary story right now for China. China has, through many of its own vehicles, been playing a increasingly prominent, if not decisive, leadership role, especially, but not only with its Belt and Road partners, but also through major financial institutions and cooperations, including most recently the announcement from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization of a new development finance institution with a number of partners. So incredible success, incredible leadership, and a lot for us to learn about what this means for China and what this means for the rest of the world, especially as we look forward to COP. What I think this is, what we can learn for COP is not only about China's planned positioning at COP itself, but what China's experience shows about how to accomplish the goals that have been repeatedly affirmed at the previous COPs, and also what the role of international collaboration can look like. So a lot for us to learn. I hope that that's basically the last you hear of me, because we're just extremely privileged to be joined by three remarkable experts who I will briefly introduce, but then hope in their comments I'll tell you more about their backgrounds. But we have Ting Li, who's the Chief Representative and the Managing Director of RMI in China in Beijing. Wenhong Xie, who's the head of China at the Climate Bonds Initiative, of course, a global initiative with a lot of important and relevant developments in the domestic landscape, which I'm eager to learn about. And then Ruoshui Sun, a researcher at Tsinghua University's Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development, who has cross-cutting expertise in climate governance, negotiations, and international climate policy. What I had hoped and asked our panelists, I would like it to be a discussion among them, but if we can start by learning about China's own domestic experiences and unpacking a bit the successes and what have contributed to the successes, as well as some light on what the future challenges are, because I think for many of us outside of China, understanding what is happening in China and what has contributed to this accelerated growth and where the domestic conversation is now would be very helpful to understand. So with that, maybe if we can start with Ting Li. And I gave my perception of what I think have been the major successes and challenges, but maybe let me ask you to revise everything I've said and to help us understand what you see to have been China's main accomplishments and what challenges you are continuing to work on.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Wafaa, Professor Lisa, and hi everyone again, and thank you for having me. Such a great privilege. My name is Ting Li. I'm the Managing Director of RMI China program and also Chief Representative of RMI Beijing office. I'm based in Beijing, and our work here is to support the country's energy transition towards its climate targets through sector-based solutions and actions. So I guess that indeed my work here is quite relevant to the questions that Lisa kindly just introduced to the webinar. So it's very happy to share some insights and based on my experience with team here. So the first thing I wish to highlight is that for the climate fight for this topic, which one of the most significant topic among all the sustainable agenda. So luckily we have the multilateral UN process to get us for over 40 years in China. We all know that it's a contracting party from the very beginning to all the climate agreements, and also an active contributor to this process. If we look at achievement or any progress that China was able to make in the past decade, the most significant progress is the consistently enhanced climate commitments, which were all made by China in occasion with and as part of the inspiring progress of the UN events, such as I think you all know, the China's first climate announcement was made in Copenhagen, COP15, and then COP21 in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was achieved, and China announced its peaking goal at a UN General Assembly 5 years ago in 2020 when China announced its carbon neutrality goal. We're now expecting COP30 on the way to COP30 this year, and everybody is hoping that there's another milestone. So if talk about policy guidance, of course, policy guidance and support is critical. Besides all the announced targets, right? Then China was able to establish a very comprehensive climate policy framework. There is a special term for such a policy system called 1+N, and one is the overarching policy guiding policy, and N means those kind of policies and action plans that cover all the sectors. So top companies are able to look into the sectoral transition targets. That's the first thing. If as a company or business, that's the first thing you need to look at. What is the sectoral targets, which aligned with the overall national targets, and in order to set up their own. And today, most of the leading companies, including the SOE state-owned companies in China, have their own decarbonization action plan in place. And if we take a closer look at energy-related sector, then the most outstanding progress, as just Professor Lisa has just mentioned, that is the rapid growth of renewable power, renewable industry. And over the past 10 years, China has seen a 35-fold increase in solar power generation and a 9-fold increase in wind power generation. And this year, 86% of our newly installed power capacity comes from renewable energy. So we're looking at also at like 3,000 gigawatt of total renewable power capacity in 5 years. Which is a huge scale, as you can all imagine. And the demand side is transitioning fast as well. So the typical example is we see the world biggest EV market with new car sales penetration rate exceeds 50%, 50% this year consistently in the past 9 months. And I really want to highlight that, if you look at the achievement, the global achievement, the most important thing, if you can only, identify one, which is absolutely the cost decrease of renewables, which is that the price of renewables are decreasing so dramatically from 17% to 90%, and it became roughly competitive with fossil fuels worldwide. So there is no doubt that China has been the major driving force to such a joint critical success, because this is the most important signal to reveal the feasibility of low carbon pathway. So, but obviously, you also mentioned the question of challenges ahead. Of course, challenges ahead, right? Number one is macro level economic status and constraints, and the geopolitical pressure that we all observed that may hinder global efforts, as well as China's assumed accelerated decarbonization process. Number two is a sharp contrast between the still rising electricity demand, For example, this year, the power demand increased by year growth of 7%. And this demand, this sharp, contrast between the demand and the current energy mix. Like many others, China's power mix remains heavily reliant on coal, which an average coal dependency of 57%. And this is a very typical case for developing countries like India, Indonesia, with coal dependency of 75% and 69% respectively. So the two countries I just mentioned is a typical example of codependency, right? And even with a renewable installed capacity of over 40% currently in China, the real generation, the power generation from renewables is only about 23%. This is still not sufficient. So phasing down and eventually eliminating coal can be financially and operationally challenging as it's continued to underpin the energy security and social equity. So number three, the finance gap. I know Dr. Xie, you may also mention the gap of the finance gap that energy transition is still facing. We know, Lisa, you mentioned that China is leading the clean energy investment, but that is only majorly focused on clean energy. But actually, the transition finance gap is much, much bigger. Because the scale and the broad sectors it covers, from our analysis, it is a cumulative of $25 trillion finance need across 5 key sectors in China for China to achieve its dual carbon goal from now till 2060. So the last one challenges I think is very critical is a high green premium of technology and alternative energy use such as green hydrogen that we wish to use for green steel making. Or CCUS, for example, etc., with an extra cost from 40% even to 80% higher compared with traditional way of production. And technologies breakthrough is still needed, industry transition, and some critical technologies are still at their very early stage and not yet ready for scaled deployment. So that's experience observation and also some challenge analysis from my side. And thank you. I'll stop here first. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Incredibly helpful. It's convenient for me to turn next to Wenhong because these days I spend a lot of time thinking about how we actually finance what we want to achieve. So Ting Li, I think, first of all, you're noting how much the global framework has influenced the target setting and the ambition is a very helpful reminder also about the importance of these global frameworks. But to my mind, a big challenge for many countries has been actually turning those targets and those ambitions into reality, because how to finance it, which to my mind also includes associated industrial policies and all sorts of other mechanisms, remains very challenging. And of course, that's different in all different contexts. But maybe if I can immediately build on what you just said, Ting Li and Wenhong, of course, respond to any of it, but I'd be particularly interested to hear your perspective on the financing and how China was able to translate the strong ambitions into real deployment, particularly when we know that the high capital costs of clean energy or transitioning economies or rapidly building out grids, the financing challenges of that have been prohibitively difficult in many contexts. So it'd be great to learn from China's experience.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for the very kind introduction and the question. It's also really great to have this conversation with you as a long-term follower and admirer of your work. It's quite a big topic to talk about China's kind of innovation in the clean or climate financial system. But I'll try to kind of more respond to your question and also Dr. Li's introduction on the kind of decarbonization in the industry side. So a very brief kind of introduction of myself and the Climate Bonds work. So we are a investor-focused international nonprofit. Our focus has been quite clear, which is to mobilize the capital market, especially the debt capital market, debt financing market, which currently stand about 100 to 120 trillion US dollar for climate solutions and also financing in both the global north and also emerging market countries. We've been doing that through providing definitions, a common definition on what is green, what is transition, what is climate alliance for investment, resilience for investment. And also we do it by being the gatekeeper on the deals that should be considered as climate aligned to a whole bunch of the international institutional investors, but we also try to offer thought leaderships on a different aspect of the climate finance from the earlier days. So in terms of the questions about how China is able to finance the decarbonization agenda, right? So I think one reflection from our work, both globally and also in China, has been that we don't really lack the capital. We have already talked about, there's not enough financing or capital for those tasks, but it's a little bit like other global challenges like sanitation, public health, or food, right? So it's not about the amount of the capital is not there. It's more about allocation and distribution of it and how to ensure equitable and rapid deployment of capital where it needed. And I think China has also been constructing its kind of policy model to kind of tag in response to this kind of challenge. And I would say it really started when the central banks, so not just within China, but globally, a bunch of central bank and supervisors have identified the climate-related risk as a factor that may contribute to the destabilization of the global financial system. And in return, they advocated, there are people like Mike Carney, Dr. Madri, my former boss, have really seen this agenda being quite crucial to those system important organizations and make the central banks focus a little bit more on just ensuring, the pricing, the price or exchange rate or economic stability, but also integrating the kind of climate kind of aspect into the kind of macro-prudential or micro-prudential, assessment. So in China, as you probably know, it's found early on as being a whole of the system approach. When people think about China's policy making, people also describe it as top-down, and I think that's also element to it in the kind of climate finance agenda. So when climate bonds with CBI were involved in the climate finance from the early days, we have been contributing the PBOC's work on greening the financial system. So instead of a market-driven initiative, it has been quite a deliberate, been designed as a kind of a systematic approach with tasks given to different kind of ministries, different agencies to work on. And when we have been using this analytical framework, which is quite familiar to those of you working inside China, but probably not for the international audience, which is a taxonomy, which is more on kind of what is green and what is not green, providing a definition as a basis for everything, financial support to the real economy, incentives, how to make sure the market is being able to absorb those kind of or reflect on those positive externalities, and also making sure the entities have the right kind of impetus, right, to take action to decarbonize. Disclosure, how do you make sure the investors knows they're actually allocating capitals in the right place and to achieve their desired outcome. Product innovation, how to make sure the capital is used to support the right kind of entities and bodies and the international cooperation, making sure that the policies are well coordinated and also we're using the common language. So when you look at and when you try to assess the progress in China's domestic kind of financial green finance or climate finance system, I think this kind of framework is still quite useful. We look at like what's happening in the past couple of days, we're seeing a lot of progress, not just for the green taxonomy or definition, but also, as Dr. Li mentioned, there's also a huge agenda to figure out how to finance the decarbonization in the hard-to-abate sectors, which arguably make up like 80 to 90% of the GDP, right? How to make sure there's a great pathway, how to make sure the banks or investors have the right incentives to support steel, cement, utilities, and also how to make sure we have the right kind of tools and also disclosure regime, also coupled with the kind of carbon market mechanisms to kind of use whatever we can to kind of support or accelerate this system. I can go on, but there's quite a lot of the kind of things that are happening at this point. But it is also interesting to see that the government has been kind of tying this financing agenda to also the overall macroeconomic growth, and also arguably also how to revive the economy, right? As you mentioned, China is facing some economic slowdowns and also industrial overcapacity, including in the clean sector. So I think the kind of green finance or climate finance agenda from the very beginning is tied to the kind of opening up of the China's financial market to international players. So for CBI, we have really been using as a key strategy to enter a kind of very fruitful discussion with the regulators and the financial institutions, state-owned banks, policy banks. The argument is that you need to make sure you're not just doing it domestically, but aligned with international rules and players. So there can be a better opening up and more capital flows from international, right? And that works quite well. And as a result, we managed to contribute to the kind of, for example, the removal of the coal and also fossil fuels from China's kind of green definition. Of course, that there has also been some agenda about diversifying financial resources sources to different kind of players and the RMB internationalization. I will not go on, but maybe the last point I will mention is that even though I think I also responding to Dr. Li's point that the financial sector have been doing a lot, right? So they're providing arguably 70 to 80% of the capex to all this green transition in different sectors, but it cannot take all the credit. I think some of my friends argue that what happened in China over the past 10 years, especially the very dramatic increase of RE deployment and also the cost, the greenium, the cost in the renewable, is a state-owned state-led capitalist model. So argued not just by the PBOC, but also by the CSEC, which oversees the SOEs and the state banks, such as the national banks and also utility companies, that they give a demand order that the for example, renewables need to go to the 50% by 2025, and they did. So the point is that they have been a quite coordinated approach. Although we can talk a little bit about the gaps as well, but it has been a state-led model that might make that happen. But the financing and the financing innovations or the instrument and mechanisms has contributed to the very dramatic cost reductions in place like solar and wind, EV, and also had a flow-on impact on the brown ones, for example, coal or gas. But that's another story. The last thing I will mention is that it is also contributing to the kind of broader kind of financial system stability agenda, as I mentioned in the beginning. So we're also exploring different kind of whether we should need to add more monetary policy measures and how to combine it with other fiscal policy and also green industry policy to make it more effective, because there has been a lot of policy there, but they don't coordinate always very effectively. So that's the kind of new agenda, how to make it and how to make sure the real economy is incentivized and supported effectively by the by the financial market to decarbonize. I'll stop here and yeah, maybe I'll jump in later.
Thank you so much. You remind me of how I always say, well, there's a bigger context to all of this. It's hard to talk about any of these tools in isolation. I think what really, I will say, strikes me from what you describe is two things. One is the translation of the concerns of macroeconomic stability into a real state-led, real economy process, not only financial regulation, although it sounds like the financial tools are part of that, but actually a more comprehensive state-led, coordinated, as you said, process, including but not limited to mandates for the financial institutions and new financial innovations. And so I do hope that we can, whether on this webinar or otherwise, unpack that even more, because the complementary roles, I think, of the state-led real economy policy tools with these financial tools seems to be decisive. So hopefully we can come back, but in the meantime, Ruoshui, if we can, I mean, maybe start to even transition the discussion from the domestic context even a bit more to the international context. One thing that strikes me is that for the slightly younger generations and those emerging in this space, the story, China's climate finance story, looks a bit different, because it is now really incorporating, as Wenhong started to say, more in the international space, more access to international capital markets, but also thinking more about how China's outward investments contribute to its own macroeconomic situation and its own domestic financial goals. So I welcome your reaction to anything you've heard or new observations, but I'd be interested especially to hear how you see China linking its own domestic transition and its own goals to this emerging international climate engagement and international strategy, and what opportunities are on the horizon there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, again, thank you for having me. And this is also a process for my learning. And thank you, Professor Wafaa. Thank you, Lisa, for having me. This is a great opportunity. Yes, but before let me introduce myself very briefly. I'm a research assistant in Tsinghua University, the Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development. And I focus on the intergovernmental climate change process. And before that, I also do some work on the decarbonization pathway modeling. Yeah, so I try to give a perspective from the intergovernmental process and from youth. I would try my best. And thank you for this question. First, I want to say that yes, China is serious about the domestic transition. And it's also we're trying to find a way to link our domestic transition with the international endeavor, because the climate change, China is serious about tackling climate change, and we can understand this attitudes of seriousness from two perspectives. The first one is loss, like every year, like China bore direct economic loss about like 200 to 300 billion. I remember, if I remember it correct, 200 to 300 billion yuan from the meteorological disasters. And for every one incremental centigrade of the temperature rise constitute approximately about 1.5% of GDP loss in China. And the number for that of the whole world is the 0.7% of the GDP loss of the globe. So yeah, China is bearing bearing more burden than average of the climate change, and health and the sea level rise are the one of the most significant loss and damage for China to endure. But I think the more attracting story is about the gains from the transition of tackling climate change, because we all know that the renewables are now the economic engines for China, and we have like the new three, like the new electric vehicles, the lithium batteries, the PV models, the export is growing rapidly. And for the first half of this year, from January to July, the export of the new three grew for 14%, accounting for about 4.3% of the total exports. And also the new three contributed 4.3, the same number, the 4.3% of the direct GDP addition in 2023, I remember. And now it is the ratio is still rapidly growing. So the international climate investment will be a meeting point where our domestic supplies meet the international demands. And furthermore, I want to mention the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the the Article 6, especially the Article 6.4, I think it can be a catalyst for Chinese enterprises investment, as China will be both the seller who receives the decarbonization projects and the buyer who provides the mature solutions below other developing countries, the standardized baselines of the carbon credits. So I think this is the dual role that China could play under the Article 6. But if we look on the broader context, I think the dual role for China, the carbon markets is a good reflection of the dual role of China as an emitter. Even though I prefer the word of maybe the largest potential mitigator or something like this, as an emitter and the solution investors. I think we can view the global transition in two dimensions: the width and the depth. The depth is about the different phases of transition. For example, like from the traditional energy saving technologies first step, and to the renewable deployment, and to the hybrid energy system for deeper deployment with like storage, transmission, flexibility, distributed grid, etc., and to hard-to-abate decarbonization, and finally to CCS, for example. This is a non-linear stage. And for each stage, it requires more financial enabling environments and for more mature technologies. So for China, like we are soaring in the renewables and initiating the systematic change for the deeper deployment, but the residual emissions for the further phases, like for the hybrid energy system, for the hard-to-abate sectors, they just are there. They just are there. So like I was frequently asked why China is still emits so much when we are still striving for 1.5 with 43% reduction by 2030 and 60% reduction by 2035. Like why China is still there? Like because they're like the residual emissions, they're just there. Just like the Rome is not constructed in one day, and Beijing cannot decarbonize China in one day as well. Especially given our strong economy and population base. So this is the reason for China as a role of the huge emitter. But on the dimension of width, the storage is we have another storage. The dimension of width is about the spread, the scale of the transition. Like our experience can provide mature product, technology, solutions to the other developing country, especially those developing countries who are hesitating at the door of the first phase of the transition. And this is where we can contribute to help accelerate the transition with investment. So I think this is the maybe the model in my mindset of how to view like China, our own domestic transition with international investment, and also as an emitter with the global clean solution provider. And I also have like a statistic from the point of finance. Like if we just count the number, China is already a net contributor of actual climate finance. Like from I just searched like from BTR, like China received 2.62 billion, which is averagely like 900 million per year. But at the same time, we announced that we provided and mobilized 24 billion since 2016, or averagely like 3 billion per year. Yeah, so yeah, like we are actually a net contributor, but I believe those finance are on the two different phase. Like we also requires international cooperation for further deeper decarbonization in our own domestic transition process. But on the same time, we can invest in the other developing countries to provide the mature solutions. So I think these two processes just happened. This could happen and should happen simultaneously. So we can be faster on both dimension of the width of the transition and the depth of the transition. But maybe for the later, if we touch on the priorities for COP30, I think one thing we need to make sure, like there is a condition for the transition of width for China's contribution to widen the transition process, only if that we can address properly the disenabling barriers in between. And yeah, maybe we will touch on this later.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just to underscore, I think a couple points you made, every point is important and interesting, but just a couple that I just wanted to underscore. One is your great point that actually this transition has been a part of China's economic story. It's not only about meeting its climate goals. And in fact, that is affirmed by, again, the IEA and other data and experiential observations that show that the drivers of the energy transition in many contexts is not even mainly driven by the climate ambition, but actually because the transition is the most affordable, resilient energy system supporting a broader low carbon competitive economy. So I think underscoring that point, actually, that the innovation and the industrial development and a lot of the build out of the clean energy has been part of China's economic story is actually important and very relevant for the second point I would underscore, which is its contributions overseas. I will mention in a moment, again, to tell our participants how they can ask questions, because I'm seeing some of the questions in the Q&A, and there is a repeated sense that because China is not part of the Annex 1 and is not making these commitments, that it's not actually contributing, or it's not contributing as much as some of the other Annex 1 countries are, and shouldn't it be? And you rightfully tell a different story, actually, which is that China has been very heavily investing in the transition in many other, in probably more than most. And some of that is complicated by the inconsistency in how we measure climate finance contributions and what China is actually contributing. So those are two, just to underscore, two important points you made among many others. Ting Li, maybe to come back to you, and now actually, if we can look even more internationally and maybe even specifically on this point, that supporting the energy transition in other contexts is not only about making a financial commitment as part of COP, but also that there are other very important ways of supporting the transition in other countries. I wonder if you can speak to either what China has been doing or could do to bring its own experience, really coming from more of an emerging market situation, much like many of its partner countries, to its extraordinary success story now, including its huge economic growth that was the result of a lot of these domestic policies. How can that be instructive for other countries, and what can China do, or what is China doing to bring these experiences to its partner countries?
Well, thank you so much, Professor Lisa, for this very meaningful, great question, actually. And I believe that, both Dr. Xie and Dr. Sun has mentioned, already shared quite great points, which is quite relevant to this question as well. But I'm very happy to also share some of my observation, because indeed, like just you guys have said, that China has gone through a very, very similar process with other emerging economies, or the South country from the South, developing countries, which is to handle environmental protection, climate, energy issues, while trying to pursue economic growth. So we don't actually have this luxury to handle them one by one. We do have the experience from the Western countries to handle them one by one, but we have to do it, simultaneously, meaning that you have to reduce the significant emissions from what you have to do, which is the industrialization process and urbanization, and while decarbonizing the emission with your own economic growth. So this is so important. I think it's for China, it's very important. I believe that in the past decades, our top leaders has been through actually also a learning curve, which is, I think, is fundamentally important to build a consensus of mental set, which is to understand the substantive nature the true nature of this fight, which is far beyond environmental protection only, but a fundamentally economic and social development pathway revolution based on innovative and large-scale energy transition. And therefore, you need to integrate energy and climate targets and actions into your macro-level economic planning first, just like the 5-year plan that Dr. Xie has just mentioned, to build synergies between energy transition with environmental protection. And by this comprehensive approach and climate actions, just like China has proved, actions to combat climate change will align and lead to economic growth opportunities and on a new and more promising growth pathway. So from zooming to China, what China has been done, we can see a very clear combination of target getting, like all the targets has been released, and also policy supporting, and more important, market driving process. Because targets are important because they are sending long-term price signals to the market, which is a foundation for scaled investment. So this is very much true, not just domestically, I think globally, and even within the multilateral process as well. And the policies and incentives are important to shape the healthy market and facilitate the steps of business from zero until scaled, right? But policies does not equal to subsidies. We have to be very clear. And only subsidies cannot help us reaching the tipping points that need for scale transition. So ultimately, it is a market solution, the business model and market driving force that can really help us to drive down the cost until reach the price competitiveness in the market, in the real market. So Dr. Sun, you mentioned the carbon market, which is a very typical case, right? And also another example I can share is China is pushing, we all know that pushing very hard on a unified national electricity market, 电力市场, which is very key to the power sector transition, especially to ensure the continued scaled up renewables to replace coal and support the economic-wide transition, because you need the power system to be cleaner as enough to support other demand-side transition. Just like I saw one very good comments in the chat, which says no matter how much portfolio of the EVs, but as long as you remain on your electricity remains on coal, it is not clean enough, right? But China has been very, very bold, and establishing a renewable dominate new type of electricity system worldwide. So that is why I would, very hesitate to use the term or assessment of overcapacity on renewables. This is a very, very key point, because as said, what we need is a sustained, continued, sufficient supply of renewables, right? But on the old, obsolete industries, you're right, Lisa mentioned the overcapacity. It is important to align your industry policy with your energy transition. Right, it's very common to this transition or the interactive kind of policy alignment. Right, when it comes to the energy transition and industry transition, we have to admit that the substantive elements are the same and very straightforward, which is we try to use less energy in the first place to improve energy efficiency, right? And then we try to use greener energy. So if you translated this approach into the industry sector, they are making less, making better, and making greener, and making smarter. Right, making less means total capacity control, both in power and other industry sectors. Indeed, China has done quite a lot of work in making less. The total emission of the most heavy industry sectors like steel, like cements, the peaked this year. Actually, the cement overall capacity decreased by 10% and will continue to decrease in the future. And energy efficient, on the other hand, has improved by 35% and it will continue to improve. So lastly, my last point is that for those fast-growing economies, solid-paced reforms in both energy system and sector transition with tailored solutions to fit local context could help balance the transition ambition and the livelihood improvement of people, which is so critical for the emerging and for the global South, right? And the economic stability and economic growth at the same time. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for addressing the comments that we're seeing too about, first of all, the replace, that the build out is not sufficient if we're not also replacing and affirming that that has been part of the plan. Let me maybe pick up a bit on one of the other questions and one of your points about the carbon credit mechanism. I think a similar kind of question exists in the climate finance space, which is that tools and instruments are not sufficient on their own if they're not additive and actually affecting new allocations or different allocations of capital. There are concerns, which I share, with carbon markets, that it is mainly about reallocating accounting more than actually financing real transitions. And I think that concern could apply to other types of tools too. So maybe Wenhong, in that context, first of all, and again, a bit on the international level, in addition to what you described in the domestic context, China is driving real external international financing mechanisms, real investments, real capital allocation that, by the way, again, even if it doesn't look the same, or especially because it doesn't look the same as some of the other commitments that are made at COP, are actually real investments in others' transition. So maybe if you can give us a picture of this landscape, help us distinguish between the types of financing that are really driving the transition, what risks to look out for in this context. Yeah, I'll stop there and see if you can help us unpack China's perspective on this.
Thanks, Lisa. Again, there's a lot to unpack, but I think just building on what you said about China's kind of leadership or expected leadership, right, in the climate finance space, I think one of the biggest questions of our day is whether China is able or is willing to take on that kind of global leadership role, right, especially in the US exit, or at least a temporary exit from the climate kind of cooperation. If I can be a little bit provocative, I think that there has been quite a bit of discussion these days about how China can position itself as the kind of electoral state and leading kind of and coordinating the kind of deployment of renewable energy and green transition, not just domestically, but also not just in the global south, but globally, vis-a-vis the petro state led by the current Trump administration. I think it's a great opportunity for the Chinese leadership to see it is not just contributing to those agenda we mentioned, but also has quite more broader implications on global order. But I think that's a question to be, the answer is still, yeah, it's not nobody knows. I think we do definitely hope China will take the leadership, but I think the real picture is a little bit more mixed. But you also mentioned about the new financing models. You mentioned about Shanghai Cooperation organization. So I have also been following and looking into the kind of new financial kind of model they're advocating, and see how different they are from the old kind of climate finance or structure. I have to say it's not that clear, coherent at this stage, but I think that they are definitely pointing to different kind of some directions. For example, regional connectivity, right? It's one thing that has been talked over and over again. I would say at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB 10 years annual conference, and almost I think 2/3 of the panels is really on that kind of regional connectivity. What does that mean? I think it's there's a kind of sense that the old kind of description or model of the climate finance, which is the assumption that the finance come from the north to south, right, with the kind of pledge or target of $100 billion a year, it's not working. And Frank, a lot of those kind of financial system, including on climate finance, has been designed in the kind of global north or developed economies. I mean, the organization I'm working for is headquartered in London, so it's a part of that kind of cluster. So you design the rules are designed in I don't know, in Brussels or, in some European or American countries, usually the lens is quite Western centric. Not saying everybody working there is Western centric, but they have been really more familiar with the kind of the industry lead and also the kind of standard and kind of operational environment in the West. So it does bring a lot of problems since I'm the kind of representative of this organization in China and pushing for the kind of decarbonization finance discussion in China. I do see some challenges about the localizing those kind of norms or standard or tools in the emerging market has been working very hard to bridge that kind of gap between North and South. But on that note, I think that there is a case to be made for a new approach, as you described, how to not just using that kind of North to South capital flows, but enable the entire global capital market, including the domestic market, to mobilizing more capital for the local kind of transition agenda, right? So compared to the $100 billion a year, we're even for the bond market, we're now at about $1 trillion and accumulative $6 trillion a year, $6 trillion for green and sustainability bond market. So that's much larger pool for those ambitions and effort which we were just describing. But the agenda is how do we even go beyond that, right? So even 6 trillion is considered quite too small to some of the larger institutional investors. We talk to BlackRock, AIB, Fidelities. They're really looking for an even larger and liquid market so that they can jump in. So the question is not about how to make 100 billion from north to south larger, but for me, it's how to rapidly scale up that investable universe so that the bigger players can be in and creating, a critical, when we go beyond the critical mass through the price discovery, it can again then drive down the cost, right, of capital to the clean and decarbonizing measures or activities. And eventually kind of reducing the greenium and getting the price parity. So that I think that's the I guess there's a lot of discussion around that, and also a lot of discussion about the kind of regional how do you kind of create green pipelines, right, from the kind of capital borrower side, and also how to get a commitment from the investor side and to create an even larger market for that. And how do you make sure that there are, for example, country platforms to kind of enhance or improve the kind of investment environment in the emerging market. And China's kind of experiences can be quite, I think, useful and very helpful to lessons and through the kind of norm diffusion, we also see a lot of adoption in the emerging market in terms of the kind of tools or market regulation or disclosure or standard. So I think that I think and also the kind of, I think there's also a focus a little bit these days on the kind of local currency, and we're actually having working on the project to kind of enhance or amplify the use of the Green Panda bond and dim sum bond. So basically that allows the global south to not just borrow in US dollar and euro, but kind of taking advantage of the low cost environment and also the trading relationship in China from countries like Egypt or Thailand or Indonesia to borrow in CNY and also to use that kind of financing for their local kind of decarbonization or low carbon transition. And we do see some of the regional financial institutions, including the MDBs like AIB or ADB, has been playing an anchoring role for those kind of effort, both by kind of de-risking some of the investment, as Dr. Li already also mentioned. One of the agenda for the kind of financing, climate financing in the emerging market is a lot of those crucial technologies that we need for the hard-to-abate sector to transition at quite early stage and high risk. And the current financial system in China or elsewhere are not able to, especially those banks, are not able to take on those kind of risks to make sure that there's adequate capital support to this technology. So that's where, and also we're also working on a very kind of crucial resilience agenda, right? So when the kind of extreme weather and climate disasters has been really amplified across the world, and how to make sure the kind of capital market is optimized to support those new topic and themes. And that's where I think a lot of MDBs and local financial institutions can be designed or prepped to support that. We're already seeing a lot of good cases. For example, AIB providing guarantees to sovereign green panda bond issuers like Egypt, or ADBs has been like really trying to advocate some blended facility, including for the coal transition, energy transition mechanisms in place like in Indonesia or the Philippines. So we see many cases of that. But again, I think it's there's a lot to cover. I just managed to mention a couple of them. But the kind of the point is that it's not necessarily a new model just for China or China-led kind of institutions, but for the kind of climate finance going forward, right? So I think we're in it together and try to see how what works and what doesn't work so well, and trying to improve the kind of the design, the system design better. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope that this conversation seeds many further discussions unpacking all of this, because you're right that there's a lot, and you've said a lot, by the way, that I think is really important. If I maybe pull out a few things, one thing is your emphasis on connecting the buyers and the investors throughout a value chain to make a transition financeable. That you can't just push on one lever. You can't just push on consumers or just push on the investment side to make transitions financeable. You have to make the whole, connect the demand or the downstream consumers, decarbonize downstream consumers if you want to decarbonize the upstream investment. So that is a very important point. I think another important point, you're humble, I think, in saying that China is not leading some of these innovations, because I think some of it are driven at least by the Chinese financial institutions, or at least what I would say is the willingness of China to do things, or the interest to do things differently if it makes sense. And maybe I'll use that as the last question to Ruoshui on this, which is that I'm actually realizing only from this conversation in the questions and answers, there's a bit of a tension between the expectation that China's leadership should mean that it is internalizing the international standards and frameworks, and join, what should it as a, should it join the capital, the traditional developed countries in the finance mechanisms, or adopt the standards in other mechanisms as a form of leadership? Or does leadership look different, or can it look different in some part, and demonstrating actually alternative and possibly more effective, in my humble opinion, definitely more effective mechanisms of financing the transition, including based on China's own experience. And as you said, Wenhong, also, by the way, working regionally, because so much of the transition is also going to be regional. So maybe, Ruoshui, if you, respond to anything, but in particular, what you think expectations are domestically, and it's maybe particularly among the younger generation, about what China's leadership should look like in this space, and is it modeling and driving the new innovations, or is it more standardizing and adopting what exists? And bring us on the road to COP, what this should mean for those of us who are going to COP, all of us, not just China, but what to take from this discussion in terms of what can and should international financing frameworks and collaborations, or climate collaborations more generally, look like to recognize, build on, and support all of the experiences and successes that we've discussed on this call.
Thank you. And I just found a question that is very related to this, the question you raised, which is a question from Taha Mahmoud. So maybe I will combine this question with your question and answer in the same time. I know we are running out of time and try to be precise. Yes, I think um, the two dimensions I just provided, like the transition in terms of width and the transition in terms of the depth, I think this can provide inspiration for the China's how China's leadership in climate finance, and also how the climate finance in the UNFCCC, especially like the NCQG last year, could look like. And I think it's also an answer to how to balance the principles under the Paris Agreement, especially the CBDR, the Article 9.1, and the huge demand for the climate finance that we are facing. And I think the one point is that I've been asked a lot of times about the question like why do we need a CBDR in recent times, especially. But I think that we cannot take Paris Agreement for granted. This is really important, and at least we have a place to sit together. And what we have in a Paris Agreement is why Paris Agreement exists at this stage. So I think it is very, very important to make sure that in the regime of the Paris Agreement, we make the principles and the rules and the provisions of Paris Agreement just work as it is designed, and we have this platform. So we have the obligation within the Paris Agreement, and we have the leadership outside the Paris Agreement. But so for one pathway, for one approach is like to use the Article 9.2 to make other parties encourage other parties provide or continue to provide support under the Article 9.2. This is a lever. But I think another possible and very potential approach for for China to China's action is the implementation. And I think this is another important signal for COP30 to deliver, is to make implementation speak, to make implementation a catalyst for the ambition. Because there is no implementation within Paris Agreement or outside the Paris Agreement. So so China's investment or the China's contribution through South-South cooperation, SCO or BRICS or Belt and Road Initiative, like their implementation could be the signal of how China expand the width of the global transition, and those information could be a catalyst for the political message we have in the COP. So I think if the COP30 can refresh the framework to make implementation the actions around the world founded by any kind of actors, any solution that we can have, to make those implementation examples really inspire the political message inside the Paris Agreement. I think this is another approach, very potential approach for China to demonstrate the climate finance leadership. So maybe the future framework will be like for those already investable, bankable solutions that we can all countries, not only China, but maybe other global South country can show their leadership, and their implementation outside the Paris Agreement can make a contribution for the negotiation inside the Paris Agreement. But for the further like high end or hard to abate or still expensive alternatives, we can make those like Article 9.1 to make 300 billion commitments to focus more on this as a lever to let it be more investable. So I think this will solve the problem of like we have the fixed obligation set in the Paris Agreement, and developed countries' obligation not fell far from the financial need, but also like we still have a cap of the financial need. Like we have the leadership on the both, but we have the obligation as a core, and we can use this core as a lever to trigger to more finance, more solution investable and more finance available. Yeah, but it's a pity. I still want to touch on this enablers of climate finance, but maybe if there is Q&A, maybe we'll elaborate on that. So this is my vision of one of the possible approach. But still, importantly, that especially at this stage, we need to be aware that the Paris Agreement is not or we cannot take Paris Agreement for granted, and we can still figure out a solution between the leadership and the responsibility.
Thank you so much. Like you, I wish we had more time. I think Xiao, if I'm not mistaken, we do have to we do have to end the session. Time passes so quickly. I think I'm right, but please correct me if there's more time. But let me just underscore one additional point that you just said that I love and really believe to be true, and also think is very relevant for all of the Columbia Global Centers and the role that they can play in this road to COP, which is that that there's absolutely both an imperative and an opportunity for regional leadership and regional initiatives in advancing the energy transition and in bringing those insights to COP. I have the incredible privilege to be working in ASEAN, where the ASEAN institutions are doing just that with extremely strong support from China, reaffirmed at the China-ASEAN Summit in May, China's partnership in supporting ASEAN's regional development. And I think that's absolutely true, that what's happening in ASEAN will be a model for other regions in how to advance the regional energy transition, both from a climate perspective, but also actually mainly from an energy and an economics perspective that aligns with our climate goals. We have so much more to learn from all of you. I have so much to learn from all of you. I'm so grateful for your time today. I think as Wenhong kept saying, and I agree, you ask a small question and the answer is huge. So I hope that we can continue with the Global Center in Beijing to unpack some of these, maybe with even more focused conversations on some aspects of this big question or on looking at the big picture. But maybe with that, because I know we are at time, let me, in my role as moderator, thank you profusely for your insights and your time, and also your leadership in this space, actually, because shaping the Chinese landscape is shaping the world's landscape, and we're all benefiting from that and learning from that. So thank you very much, and I very much hope that we can continue this conversation in future webinars.